There's both pros and cons to Indianapolis's water supply picture. We are one of the biggest cities in the eastern part of the U.S. not on what is considered a major water body. Chicago is on Lake Michigan. You know, there's other large cities along the Ohio River, but Indianapolis is sitting on the mighty White River here, which isn't quite the same scale. The challenge is looking at what sources are available, using those in an efficient manner.
My name is Jack Whitman. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Planning and Integration for Intera. Intera is a water resources planning firm that does a lot of different work all over the country. I was the director of the study. I was the one that helped develop the scope of work and have been the kind of continuous director of that operation of the entire investigation. Our role has been as the hydrologist to help people understand quantitatively what the effect of other people's use might be. The question of whether we need to be planning for water is really a good one, because when we're thinking about water, the real problem that we have as a society is that we don't usually see the thing that we are wondering about whether we have enough of. Water will never become a less important thing if we look forward over decades or centuries. It's going to become more and more important. In order for public officials to really do the job of helping guide community growth, we need to understand what the consequences of our water use might be and how much there really is. So how much do we need in the future is really important, but how much do we have and where can we get that water? Unlike a lot of other states, the state of Indiana is a manufacturing economy. It has a bigger fraction than most other states, or maybe all other states, in terms of its total economy is derived from manufacturing. And because of that difference, the state of Indiana has more need for water because the users of water, the industries, the manufacturing need that water for processed water, for steel, for parts, for electronics, for pharmaceuticals. So all the different things that we make in Indiana require water. And that is one of the reasons why it's so important here.
My daughter was in Girl Scouts, and they came out to do a farm tour one time. I went through and did the math on what it took to grow one stalk of corn, you know, from one seed to one tiny little pebble of sand size, dry fertilizer, like a thimble cup of nitrogen fertilizer, but it took 2 gallons of water. And when you lay all that out, it makes you realize how much water it takes. And if you don't get it from rain, you better have it from somewhere else. I don't want to get to a point where you have to meter every single well and you're limited on what you're doing, but it costs money to pump water, so we don't want to use any more than we need to start with.
The change in water use over time is going to be different in every part of the state, because in central Indiana, the biggest water user, the dominant water user is public water supplies and power production. The water utilities in all of the communities in central Indiana will need more water as they grow. This is the growing part of the state, population-wise and economically. The water demand is a different thing to try to forecast and anticipate. Part of the reason for that is because our demands on a single day are so variable. Each one of the sectors, agricultural, irrigation, manufacturing and industry, power production, and domestic water resources, all are used and have different variability from one to the other. And so when you've looked forward in any of these sectors, you have to anticipate how each sector responds to the season, but also how that will change over decades. Here we were trying to anticipate the water demand 50 years in the future, which is a long way, of course. When we did that forecast for central Indiana, it looks like there is more than 100 million gallons a day is going to be needed on average. That's over a year. It's more than 100 million gallons a day during the summer, but that's on top of 400 million gallons a day right now for the 9-county region in the center of the state. So it'll go from near 400 to near 500 million gallons per day is the anticipation. The question of whether we have enough is really an important question that was the purpose of this second piece of work, this large report that really describes water availability. The whole idea behind this report is to say how much really is there to use. It's got to be a finite number, it's not infinite. But what is that number, and is it large enough to take care of the needs that we have even into the future? The problem of water availability as a threshold is that when you try to map where water is within the basin, it's also being affected not just by how much water is taken out, but where it goes back into the river.
Our water supply is made up of surface waters, like those found in rivers and reservoirs, as well as water that is underground in aquifers. Pipes and pumps and wells allow us to extract it from these sources for use in our communities. Some of the water that is removed is eventually returned to a surface water like the White River through other pipes as a discharge. These discharges come from industrial users that use water in their manufacturing process or wastewater treatment plants that manage sewage from our homes and businesses. But not all of the water we draw from wells or surface waters gets returned, and sometimes the returns are not in the same place where the water was extracted.
So you've got these gaps between the intakes that divert water out of the river and the discharges back into the river, and that's really where there could be effects of differences between flows. However, even that is not a problem if you have storage in your landscape to basically reservoirs that you can release water from during the low flow periods. So in the report, we describe the subbasins within this large network of basins that flow together into the White River. We show individual subbasins that will be in deficit, that more water will be taken from individual basins than might be available, than would be put back, essentially, in that basin. That doesn't mean there's no water in there. And when we talk about water availability, one of the things that we did in this project was we accounted for the fact that the water that's extracted from this system is usually used by someone, whether it's a manufacturer, a mining industry, or a household, whatever. And in every case, that water isn't evaporated. It's actually moved through the household, and there is a wastewater discharge from every household.
To get to our homes, water is taken out of surface waters, like the White River or Eagle Creek Reservoir, or high-capacity groundwater wells, and passed into a treatment plant. There, the water is treated to remove sediment, bacteria, and other pollutants before being delivered through a system of underground pipes to our homes and businesses. Any water we use that goes down a drain, from sinks and toilets for example, travels through a second system of underground pipes to a wastewater treatment plant. There, our wastewater is treated to remove pollutants before being returned to a surface water like the White River. These returns are critical to water availability for other users and the river's overall volume and flow.
There's another piece of the puzzle, and that is stormwater management.
How we manage stormwater is an important part of our water supply. Rain that falls on our roofs, roads, and parking lots typically runs to a storm drain that moves this stormwater quickly to a nearby water body, carrying with it any pollutants it picks up along the way. In a more natural system, a place without development of roads and houses and other hard surfaces, much of our stormwater would be soaked into the ground to recharge our aquifers. This process is critical to the replenishment of the groundwater supplies we rely on. Depending on soil types and other geological conditions in the area, it can take many years for water to move through the ground to refill our aquifers. So, in order to better protect surface water quality from pollution and also to help replenish groundwater supplies, stormwater is best managed by capturing it where it falls and allowing it to infiltrate the soil.
So we looked at the range of different changes that are anticipated. And some of them are wetter and warmer, which by the way, still adds water demand because of the warmer part. And the drier in the late summers and wetter annually, but drier in the late summers, we looked at that too, at the effects of these different forecasts of climate change and how they might affect water availability. There's a lot of water in the streams, more flows than usual, than average. So we actually have a system that's more full than used to be, more flows, more higher water levels in our reservoirs. But that doesn't change the seasonal aspect that we were talking about before. That still, there are dry periods. There's always going to be some fluctuation. We tried to account for the climate change. We looked at various impacts, and we saw a 40 million gallon a day addition to the monthly average for the forecast that would be 50 years from now. So there might be not just 100, but 100 plus a few tens of millions of gallons a day of needed water. So the analysis of water availability that's described in this report is really about how much water is there by volume. Sort of, can we find X million gallons per day in an area, or add that much to the withdrawals in an area? The other question is a little bit one notch more complicated, and that is, if it's there, is it okay can I drink it? Do I have to treat it before I drink it? Is it contaminated with things that are hard to take out, like solvents, or is it contaminated with something that's really hard to take out, like nitrogen and nitrates, which are kind of a small molecule, but maybe less dangerous? The question of water availability is affected by the water quality that's in the resource. So we can't just say that all water is equal, that really if there's a contaminated zone, that water isn't as available as the water that's next to it that's pure and clean. So it's in almost everyone's interest to know how much is contaminated or needs to be treated and how much is available for use.
While we are used to seeing rain fill up our rivers and streams, much of the volume of water in our waterways year-round doesn't actually come from rainfall. In fact, most of it comes from groundwater moving from adjacent aquifers into these waterways through the soil, sand, and gravel layers that connect them. This part of the river's flow is known as base flow. The movement of groundwater from an aquifer to a river can take decades, so it is important to understand the system as one resource that is interconnected across a large area and manage it with that in mind. How we use and care for groundwater in one area of our watershed can affect the river in a seemingly different area of the watershed.
The water budget for any basin or for any area is really just what it sounds like. It's a balancing equation that says, of all the water that arrives here, where does the water end up? Water budgets are done on all sorts of scales. So they can be done at grand scales, the entire watershed of the Wabash River. You can also do it to a tributary of the Wabash River. The West Fork of the White River that flows through central Indiana has tributaries. It has Eagle Creek, it has Cicero Creek, it has Duck Creek and Pipe Creek, etc.
A water budget is sort of like a household budget because it is a type of accounting system. Your household budget is made up of inputs, like the money you earn with each paycheck and money someone may give you as a gift. In a water budget, those inputs include things like local precipitation, such as rain or snow, and any water flowing into a local section of a river or subbasin from areas and tributaries upstream. Your household budget also includes outputs, like the money you spend on food, utilities, and housing, plus any money you may choose to set aside in your savings account. Water budgets also have outputs, like the amount of water withdrawn directly from the river and its adjacent aquifer, as well as the water stored in its aquifer through stormwater infiltration or in a nearby reservoir. Finally, when you consider what's left in your household budget, after subtracting the outputs from the inputs, you might find yourself with leftover money. Think of this as money you didn't need and could give away to others. If we take this idea of leftover money, or in this case water, and apply it to the water budget concept, it would include things like the water we discharge after using, like household or industrial wastewater. It would also include any water that was simply not used or stored in the subbasin, such as the water left in the river. This becomes the amount of water we send downstream to the next community, which then becomes part of the next subbasin's water budget. Essentially, our water budget is influenced by those upstream, and our water budget choices impact those downstream. This is why it is important to plan for water both locally and regionally. Remember, base flow in a river determines how much water is available for our use in communities, as well as for wildlife and recreation. It is a measure of the amount of water regularly flowing in a stream or river when it is not raining. Base flow also determines the river's capacity to dilute pollution from dischargers. Indiana does not have a minimum flow requirement, but it is an important idea to think about and understand. The amount of water in the river affects the effort and expense required to treat it for drinking water and the habitat available for fish and other wildlife, for example. Viewed this way, a portion of a river's base flow provides critical functions to a system as a whole and therefore suggests a limit to how much water can be extracted at a given time to keep things in balance. This limit is called an in-stream flow requirement. This is where the concept of recharge becomes key, because today's recharge is tomorrow's base flow. Infiltration, the movement of rainfall into the soil and down to aquifers, is critical to maintaining adequate base flow. Infiltration rates and associated aquifer recharge rates vary widely depending on soil types and other geological factors. So it is important that we maximize the amount of stormwater we capture in place through infiltration.